Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Metin Gürkan, Director of Center for Artificial Intelligence Research. And then I would like to welcome you to our Artificial Intelligence in Action seminar. And then this afternoon, our seminar is going to be presented by one of our CARE faculty, Dr. Oguz Akbilgic. And he's an artificial intelligence expert, innovator, and entrepreneur with extensive expertise in machine learning, statistical modeling, and business administration. Actually, he has two PhDs, right? And then one of them is in statistics. And then his research primarily focuses on the development of AI models for the detection, risk prediction, prognostic assessment, and remote monitoring of cardiovascular diseases, including heart failure, sudden cardiac death, and arrhythmias. He's also involved in research projects targeting the detection and risk prediction of neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, as well as adverse maternal events. He has published and presented over 100 research papers, including 2 book chapters and 2 editorials, and currently serves as the principal investigators on multiple projects funded by the National Institutes of Health, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and Atrium Health. Today, he's going to talk about sex. And his talk will introduce the novel ECG sex index, ESI, and a continuous representation of biological sex and its utility in predicting cardiovascular and non-cardiovascular events. Oguz, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gürkan, for the introduction and also for the opportunity. Let me. Okay, great. So, as Dr. Gürkan mentioned, today I will talk about a novel variable we created. We call it ECG sex index. We propose this as an alternative to binary sex, how it is used to be considered in clinical practice when not only making risk predictions, but also in assessing patients based on their sex. Some disclosures. This is joint work with our team, led by Dr. Karabayır, Dr. Harrington, and myself. And also, just to be clear from the beginning, this study only focuses on the biological sex, indicated as male and female. It has nothing to do with the gender, social sex, in the social norms, how people identify themselves. So first, I will be boring a little bit. I will give it like a background in the ECG AI because this is what we use in the derivation of the ECG sex index, and then how we use sex currently in clinical practice, in epidemiology, and then how we derive the ESI index, and then what is the potential and utility of ESI index with some examples from cardiovascular and non-cardiovascular domain. So a little bit of the background on the ECG. ECG is one of the oldest like a quantitative way of measuring the activity of the heart. On the left-hand side, you see a 600 pounds, the first one of its first examples by Einthoven, 600 pounds ECG machine. And then you see how it is used in the clinic, those clinical ECG machines that is used for resting ECGs in the clinic, as well as some Holter devices, how to gather this data outside the hospital. But it is also being revolutionized. I think, not that I have any conflict of interest with Apple, but I mean, thanks to them, they introduced, I think, first smartwatch with ECG functionality in 2017. That has been a game changer in this field. Since then, we have been discovering a lot more about ECG than what we knew, at least in terms of its potential. Now we have those other devices, like by LI core, you can see. Even now we can gather ECG during exercise. This is on the right hand side. You see one of the devices from Fourth Frontiers. But despite all these technologies, at the core, the data is the same, time to voltage data. On the left-hand side, you see ECG generated by the device I showed, the 600-pound device. On the right-hand side, you see an ECG generated by one of the recent technology. This is a huge advantage for AI. So basically, you may be developing AI models that are using 30, 40 years of ECG, raw ECG data, but still may be applicable to ECG you will record tomorrow. It may not be the case in much fancier and much more accurate diagnostic images tools, because the change in the resolution in like MRI and CT, that may be affecting the applicability of AI more than it does in the ECG. So, because it is one of the oldest data model technology, we know a lot about ECG. We know what is the duration of P wave, what is the duration of T wave or QRS. We know a lot about it, and when there are some deviations from these normals, we can attribute them to certain conditions. But what we mean with ECG AI is, instead of using these well-known ECG characteristics, or I take a step back, if we use these ECG characteristics in machine learning model, this will be ECG AI. Or instead of using those well-known ECG characteristics, we may be implementing signal processing to ECG data by treating it as a signal, like Fourier transformation, wavelet transformation, and then we can extract features and then either use them in neural networks or machine learning. This will be ECG AI as well. Or this is what we are doing frequently, is that we can feed the deep learning model with the raw time to voltage data or with the images without extracting any feature, without feature engineering step, and let the deep learning extract its own features and then associate it with certain outcomes. To summarize, when we say ECG AI, we are talking about either non-traditional utilization of the traditional ECG characteristics or non-traditional ECG characteristics analyzed by non-traditional methods. By the way, none of them does anything to do with the ECG. ECG is the same ECG. We just analyze it in a different way than how we used to until maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So what are the use of the ECG AI? It can be used in disease detection, risk prediction, estimation of echo, MRI parameters, estimation of the labs, vital signs. These are only a few papers that our lab has been doing. There is much more literature outside. These are some of the active projects in the ECGI domain that is ranging from detection, risk prediction of cardiomyopathies, heart failure, sudden cardiac death, to assessing lab values, BMPs, troponin, or outside the cardiovascular domain, detection of hyperkalemia, dementia, Parkinson's disease, also remote monitoring by utilizing wearable ECG. So this is the background, but how it is used. This is a very specific example. For example, how we use ECG AI to predict risk for heart failure, for example. This is one of the studies we did. Basically, we have 14,613 people who does not have heart failure at the baseline. We have their ECGs at the baseline. About 5.5% of them develop heart failure in next 10 years. And then they have frequent follow-up, so that's why we know. So basically, we use this ECG collected at the baseline at the enrollment, knowing that none of them had heart failure. We use convolutional neural networks using ECG as an input, heart failure, incident heart failure within 10 years as an outcome, and then we get AUC of 0.67. But this is a very mature field. There are well-known heart failure risk calculators like ERIC studies risk calculator, Framingham Heart Studies risk calculators, which are either like pool cohort equation, logistic regression, or Cox proportional hazard. processing well-known risk factors that can be age, BMI, diabetes, history, blood pressure, or prevalent coronary disease. So if we would compare it to those models, the accuracies are like a pretty similar. We use ECG alone. And then when we combine them, it gets better. But this is also validated in a different cohort, which is a MESA cohort. One thing you can see is if the MESA external validation, I'm talking about the third row, the ECG AI outcomes don't really change, 0.76, 0.77. Even when we assess it in the EHR data, still we get 0.77. Does it mean that like history of left ventricular hypertrophy is not important? No, but probably what's happening is all these conditions, including demographics, have some certain ECG markers, ECG patterns, and AI is able to capture them. Just to remind you here, like sex is also part of the risk prediction models, but ECG is somehow accounting for this changing and providing similar accuracy. Now let's switch the gear and let's talk about how sex is used in the clinical practice. The definition of sex is very easy if you want it, but can be very, very complex if you want to get really accurate. We can say that sex can be identified as presence of Y chromosome and the subsequent development of male or female reproductive organs. Easy. We can say this is 0 or 1, yes or no. But at the metabolic level, it is much more complicated than that. Like everyone has testosterone or estrogen hormones, and it gets even more complicated when we get in the anatomical, physiological, metabolic levels. It is we cannot say that if you are male, if you have testosterone, everyone has testosterone. So that's why this created a convenience. So there are a lot of things that we cannot quantify at the very like a cellular level, metabolic level. And then we decided that for convenience that we can represent sex as a binary variable and then assume that this binary trait can explain everything that we couldn't measure, quantify. So we use this in epidemiologic studies and also risk prediction models as 0, 1 to predict. But it is more than that. Like there are certain conditions, like for example, the QT time, the QT prolongation, it is different. So if your QT time is whether more than 460 or not, if you are female, it may be considered as prolonged QT or not. But if you are male, it may be the 440 or 450, depending on the equation. Even how we make clinical decisions about the patients is based on assuming that they are either male or female. But when we look at the biology, even just this very simple chart shows that it is not the case. Like the green is the change of the growth hormone over time, but the blue line shows the change of the testosterone over time, the testosterone levels. Of course, by birth, it starts increasing, maturing, becoming adult. Over time, it decreases. Same with the like estrogen or estrogen related like hormones, proteins. But in the males and females, I will come back to this chart. This is very interesting actually. So it is like by becoming adult, it is reaching to a certain point, and then it starts decreasing by age. So someone at female, 20 years old, in a clinical model coded as 0, representing female. A female at 60 years old in the same clinical model coded as 0. How accurate it is. So, and then when we look at the literature, there is this study, I think published in 2019 or 20. Basically, that was an examination of if using AI from ECG can we estimate sex. The answer is that this was a quite interesting study, actually. Basically, input of the model is 12-lead ECG processed by deep learning model, and it tells you whether this ECG is coming from a male or female individual. Accuracy, like very high accuracy, AUC of 0.96, 0.97 AUC. This is a very accurate model that can detect. So that also makes sense. I mean, some of those like ECG, well-known ECG characteristics, the normal ranges are different for males and female. This is not quite surprising, probably. But then they said that what is really ECG picking up? So, of course, they could see the like a QT time of certain ECG characters, but they also checked the testosterone levels. So basically, they check the correlation between the testosterone levels and the outcome of the ECG AI. And then there was a very high correlation. So basically, in this model, male is coded as 1, female is coded as 0. So higher ECGI outcomes indicate more likely to be male. And then other ones, the testosterone level, it's like correlation coefficient of 0.46 they obtained in the study. So basically, it is probably something picking up not only ECG changes between males and females, but also somehow like a male hormones, testosterone hormones are also very correlated with this. So what is our goal? Our goal is to develop an alternative metric to represent expression of sex-specific effects on human biology attributes in a continuous rather than a binary manner. So our expectation is that this continuous representation of sex at least wouldn't be inferior to its binary representation, and in certain cases it would perform better than the binary sex variable. So to make our point, we split our study into two phases. In phase 1, first we repeat what our colleagues from Mayo Clinic, that original paper, what they did. Since we don't have access to their model, we built our own model. We use ECGI model that takes 12-lead ECG as the input, process it, and tells whether this ECG is coming from a male or female. And then we develop it, we validate it in multiple data sets. In phase 2, we develop the ESI, ECG sex index. And then we try to assess its utility in multiple cardiovascular and non-cardiovascular conditions. So first of all, we are lucky, thanks to our institution in their faith in this ECG AI project. So now we have access to 3.7 million ECGs from Wake Forest healthcare system. We utilize all these ECGs. It's coming from almost 750,000 patients with certain demographic breakdown. So basically, we split our data to 20% holdout, untouched. We use this other 80% to train, validate, etc. And then when we did this in the Wake Forest holdout data, we obtained an AUC of 0.95, which gives sensitivity and specificity of 0.87. So basically, 87% of the time, it correctly identifies whether this ECG is coming from a male or female. We also did the check for different races, the accuracy of the model for like a Caucasian, Black, Asian, American, Indian. So we got some similar accuracies. The Asian is, I highlighted it here because our external validation is only Asian cohort. The AUC on the Asian is like 0.94. So then we said that, okay, now we need to validate, take it outside the Wake Forest. So there is this data set. The people in this field would know Physionet. They have like a very large ECG data repositories shared. We used one of the data set from Physionet, which is over 45,000 ECGs coming from more than 10,000 patients. Our external validation the data was coming from 100% Asian, the data was coming from China. And then when we validated our model, we got AUC of 0.92. So this was pretty concordant. It shows the generalizability of our model. But there is one caveat. This is our derivation cohort is EHR data. But this external validation cohort was actually, I was expecting it to not perform as good because it is an arrhythmia database. They created this to study arrhythmia. Most of these patients have very severe arrhythmias, arrhythmic conditions. Despite that, our model is able to detect the sex with very high accuracy. So we were doing another study with our colleagues at University of Wisconsin. This is totally different study to assess the long-term effects of cigarette versus e-cigarette using ECG AI. Based on our data use data share agreements, only data we had access is the waveform ECG data. We don't know whose ECG is. We know nothing about those ECG. We do our analysis. We sent the results. They assess the accuracy. We kind of requested whether if they could validate our sex model as well. Literally, we did the predictions, send them to results, and they calculated AUC because we didn't know whether they were male or female. We got AUC of 0.93. So this was also like another confirmation that our original model is very accurate in detecting male and female. Once we were convinced that our model is working well and generalizable, then we skip the next stage. Now we are trying to drive the ECG sex index. So on the left-hand side, you see the distribution of the outcome of the original model. Again, males are coded as 1, females are coded as 0. So the outcome of this model is, I think, very like binomial distribution, of course, for males, mostly around closer to 1, getting more infrequent towards 0. For females, more values are close to 0, getting more infrequent towards 1. But this is not a very good variable to use as a continuous index. The reason is that, for example, the difference between 0.1 and 0.2, ideally in a perfect continuous variable, we would expect that this distance wouldn't change. Distance between 0 and 0.1 would mean the same thing as the difference between 0.4 and 0.5. But we know that from this, it is not the case. Now we created this ESI index. So this is the process. So when there is a new ECG, we run this ECG through our model. We get a value between 0 and 1. And then this value, and first we fit a probability distribution here. And then, for example, this value is 0.6. And the ESI is the area under this curve, under this frequency distribution-based probability distribution, gives the ESI index. So if it is right exactly in the middle, for example, right where the threshold is, it will be 0.5. So what is the final distribution? Perfectly uniform. This is the distribution of the ESI. But if we look at the ESI for females, you see the pink ones. ESI for males, you see the distribution. But when we combine, since we are trying to get the sex out of the account, so now overall distribution is perfectly uniform. So these are, here you see the ESI index for overall males and females, and all for different subgroups. Like, for example, for a male, average ESI is 0.27. For a female, average ESI is 0.27 and 0.72. So when we look at different races, for example, for a Caucasian female, average ESI is 0.27. For a black female, it is significantly higher, and for an Asian, it is significantly lower, etc. The same thing for the BMI categories. If I might skip the age, I will come back to that. In females, only significant difference is observed in the underweight category. For normal, overweight, obese category, no difference in the average ESI in females, but underweight category, their ESI is higher, like more closer to male. On the other hand, on the males, actually, again, assuming normal is the reference category, it is ESI is much lower in the underweight category, but more closer to female, but also a little higher on the overweight and obese category. So now the more interesting part is with the age. We could do it more granular level, smaller age brackets, but this is what we did as a preliminary analysis. So now we are looking at the ESI in females at age brackets of 18 to 30, 30 to 45, 45 to 60, and 60 plus. As you can see, ESI index in female, reminding that closer to zero was the female, 1 is the male. In females, starts with 20, and then it gets higher and higher over time, significantly increases by age. And for it is the same thing for males. It starts with high value between 18 to 30, 30 to 45. There is no significant difference. But then after 45, ESI starts decreasing. If I may remind you this chart, so for females, the estrogen level, estrogen-related hormones were like after like a 20, 30 starts decreasing. After 45, there's a sharp decrease, which is actually, we also see it here, from 21 jumping to 25. And again, same in the males, we don't see a huge change until maybe like a 50s, 60s. Actually, we see it here as well. ESI starts changing after 45, around here significantly. We are not saying that ESI looks at estrogen or testosterone, but it is definitely correlated with it. And it is not necessary to estimate estrogen or testosterone, but at least we know that it is doing something right. So, okay, how can we utilize it? Well, one way to utilize it would be to use it as a predictor for certain diseases. We started with the heart failure. So first we said that what if we built machine learning models using ESI to predict 5-year risk for heart failure. So now we have patients, we have their ECGs. At the time of the ECG, now no one has heart failure, but some of them develop heart failure within 5 years. Some of them don't. These are my cases and controls. First, in the model M1, we use binary sex plus like other well-known heart failure risk factors like black race, BMI, ventricular rates, hypertension history, valvular disease, etc. Those don't change. Only thing changes between 3 models is in one model we use only binary sex, the other one we use ESI, and the other one we use both. When we look at the AUCs, when we use only binary sex, 0.76, ESI 0.77, when we use both, 0.78. But more importantly, this also we need to find an area where the sex is the single most important predictor. I think this is where we will find the real utility of ESI, but this is one examination we did. So when you look at in the model 3, which is the most accurate one, when we do variable importance analysis, male sex, binary sex, has the lowest importance, while ESI has number 3, like a much higher importance in predicting heart failure. This is another, now we want to take it outside cardiovascular domain. So there is this model to predict risk for ESRD, end-stage renal disease, if we may define it as kidney failure. Kidney failure here defined as either kidney transplant or transition to dialysis among people with CKD, chronic kidney disease. There is this model developed by Tengri et al. So they simply developed a series of models. One of the model, if anyone finds their paper, is model 2, use only age, sex, and EGFR. Using this, they reached the accuracy of 0.91 in predicting 2-year risk for transitioning to kidney failure. This time we said, what if we don't build a model from scratch, but we use the existing model, existing risk predictor? What we did was, first, in this model, this is already using sex. We use the binary sex as it is in our data, but we got 0.93. And then we replaced binary sex with ESI, we got 0.94. We said, okay, what if we build a model from scratch? By letting model pick between binary sex and ESI. So this time there is one caveat we did. So we use our variables are binary sex, ESI, age, EGFR. But if I may remain, EGFR calculation has sex in it. EGFR, one of the other parameters, is calculated by sex. We actually calculate a new EGFR using sex as a continuous variable as well. So how many variables I counted? Like a sex, binary sex, ESI, EGFR, EGFR based on ESI and age. 5 variables. And we did a simple logistic regression model with backward elimination. And the final model produced similar accuracy, 0.94, but selected only 2 variables. One of them is age. Well, this is the odds ratio. The other one is EGFR calculated by ESI. It didn't pick binary sex or it didn't pick traditional EGFR in the final model. So this is another, I acknowledge that the accuracy differences are not huge, but at least we can say that up to this point, ESI is not inferior to binary sex, if not better. So another way, another thing we looked at is the long QT syndrome. So the QT interval of ESI is associated with the duration of the ventricular action potential, which correlates with the duration of the ventricular depolarization and repolarization. I read this just to be correct, because this is not, I want to be accurate in the areas that I am not that strong. So basically, the abnormal rates are different for abnormal intervals are different for males and females, but 500 over 500 is like a severely high. For males and females, this limit, the prolonged Q2 limit, may be considered as 450 or 460 for males and females. Here we are not building a risk prediction model. We are just looking how ESI looks for different ESI intervals. What is the prevalence of this abnormal QT? Again, we are not doing any risk prediction model. So here we did analysis for 10 different ESI brackets. So we split the entire ESI, which is, here you see 0 to 100. I mean, it's actually 0 to 1. So here, not 0 to 10, actually 0 to 0.1, 0.1 to 0.2. So basically, when we look at the females, if the ESI is between 0 and 0.1, 83% of the people has normal QT time. And if ESI increases, reminding that 0 means female, 1 means male. If the ESI gets higher in females, you see that there are less people are normal, and more people have prolonged QT, long QT. And on the males, when we look at males, let's start from the last one. If the ESI is between 0.9 and 1, 83% of the people has normal QT. But if ESI decreases, getting closer to 0 where females are marked, normal rate is decreasing and abnormal rate is increasing. You can also see it in the plot. The green represents the normal QT, and the females, ESI increases, normal decreases, and abnormal ones increases. In the males, you see a similar trend. So this is what it tells us, that sex discordant is important. If we say that like 0 is 100% accurately identified female, 1 is 100% accurately identified male, if the ESI is getting far from it, we can, if we may call it as a sex discordant, it is associated with some abnormalities in the QT. Lastly, we also looked at the all-cause mortality. So here we are looking at the 1-year mortality. Again, not adjusted for anything. All we do is we have the ECG, we calculate the ESI from this ECG, and whether this person died in 1 year or not, for any reason. Of course, we limit our data set to people where we have this death information. If some people died outside the hospital, if we don't know this information, they are excluded. So there are about like 51,000 people in this cohort. By the way, I didn't mention this, but it is very important. All this post-hoc analysis, once the ESI was driven, everything is in the holdout data set of Wake Forest. We never used it. We had like 3.7 million ECGs in the holdout. We had like maybe 300, 400,000 ECGs. Every post-hoc analysis are this heart failure, kidney failure, QT, all-cause mortality. They are all based on the holdout results. So this is quite interesting. So again, when we look at these ESI intervals, like we did in the QT, from 0 to 1 increasing, in the females, if someone's ESI is between, if a female's ESI is between 0 and 0.1, the all-cause mortality rate is only 5%. But if it increases, which means the sex discordant for females increases, all-cause mortality increases too. In the males, it is lowest when someone's ESI is close to 1. But when it gets lower, it is significantly increasing. And you can hear, this is the visualization of this. So in the females, in different ESI brackets, these are showing the association with all-cause mortality. We don't imply causality, just the simple statistics we are presenting here. And these are our findings so far. So we conclude that ESI is a non-inferior, or at least or better than binary sex in detection and prediction of cardiovascular and non-cardiovascular diseases. And another thing we did not study here, but may worth looking at, is the sex discordant itself, which can be defined as absolute value of 1 minus ESI, may be a risk predictor for like a many cardiovascular, non-cardiovascular conditions. And in the future, studies are really needed. We are hopefully going to work on them once we are done with this, in the prediction of like any conditions where sex is hypothesized to be a risk factors, may also consider using ESI. And another area we think that our model has huge potential is the transgender people. We have our quite striking results, but because our sample size is low, we are not presenting them. But there is really like a need for access to larger data sets for transgender people to see how ESI can actually make much better risk prediction models for transgender individuals. This is my presentation, and this is our team. And if there are any questions, happy to take.
So if you have any questions, and if you are online, please put them on chat, and Brittany will be monitoring them. Do we have any questions?
So Fahim sent in a question. Would you prefer to read it out loud, Fahim, or would you like me to read it for you?
Fahim, are you available in a place where you can turn your microphone on and ask yourself, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, Mike, first of all, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Oguz. I really learned a lot from it. My question was, considering the significant portion of the PhysioNet database, which is has arrhythmia in general, do you think your model was kind of learning to become more generalizable because this data set was very imperfect?
Actually, we think that it was a huge disadvantage for our model to test it in a very, very specific like a arrhythmia database. So even with that, I think we got like a pretty good AUC close to what we got in the whole dot. But we also did another external validation which confirmed very similar AUC. So if we didn't have the results from this blinded external validation, actually we were trying to see whether we can get another EHR data to validate it. So, but at least we are a little more assured right now that it looks generalizable.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And JB Collins, would you like to read out your question?
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm a performance improvement person, and this is your question. I saw in your record there that you do PI projects for Atrium Health. I'm just curious about your role as a PI supporter, please, and thank you.
I'm very sorry. I could not hear you very well. Do you mind repeating it? Or if it is written on the chat, Britain?
He was asking kind of your role as a PI on like several projects funded by Atrium Health.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Sure. So by Atrium Health, there is one, by Atrium Health, I'm talking about the entire enterprise. I had like a multiple pilot projects. One of them was to predict risk for fatal coronary heart disease. I was the PI on that. There is another project now recently funded by Sanger. I am co-PI with Dr. Sherry Saxonhouse, which is on the prediction of recurrence, AFib recurrence risk among people going through the ablation procedure.
He's an awardee of our center pilot award, and then we invite our pilot awardees to come and give talks about their pilot awards and their research, and then that's why we invited him. Thank you for that question.
Dr. Khanna has a question.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Oz. Great presentation and obviously very exciting work. And yeah, I hope, like I've told you, that you're going to take this beyond just outpatient medicine. As I'm thinking of this, I think this is obviously going to change the world. Change the way we clinicians see our patients, right? So if I were to, and this is just my question to you, do you foresee a future where every time I see a new patient in the operating room or the ICU, I would run this model or use a continuous wearable EKG that is powered by this model, and then reassign an ECG AI-based sex or some variant of that based on what the model is telling me? How would that change our clinical practice? Because it looks like, your model is also showing that this may change over time for any one given individual, correct?
Yes. So that's thank you for your comments on the question. What I see is that, of course, if we can validate it, I believe we have quite good results, but we are not done yet. I think that this can be used to every time, instead of using sex, if we can use ESI and recalculate the ESI every time when there is a need for a recalculation of a risk predictor. But based on our results, I personally wouldn't expect this to change from 1 hour to another much, but it may change by months, by years, especially even for a person. If someone is being assessed for heart failure this year, next year we may recalculate their ESI and use this. But that part begs further investigation. Actually, what you are asking, someone is in the hospital, inpatient, we are continuously monitoring their ECG. How much ESI would change for them? Ideally, it wouldn't change too much, but it's definitely worth assessing. Actually, that's a very interesting question. And one thing, if I may add, is that this actually, I know the sex and gender very like intermingled concepts and very sensitive topics. This actually, if we use it, we don't even need to ask patient whether they are female or female. They want to identify male or female. This literally, this has the ECG, it generates the ESI. This also takes this uncomfortable conversation, especially for in certain conditions.
I see several clinicians in the audience, so if anybody wants to collaborate with Oz to explore these questions, that will be great.
Very happy to.
Yeah, it's great, Oz. And just as a follow-up, I mean, you do realize that if this becomes a prime time, then even things like trials, say drug trials, every time we bring in a new drug, we want to know how at least males and females identified by biological sex will have differing effects, right? So if I'm trying to randomize and report a drug trial, then a future table 1 could look very different, right? Would have an ESI along with, so the ESI at the time that the patient receives the drug would not necessarily be the same as the self-identified sex, correct?
Absolutely. I think you made a really great point. I mean, that may change how we recruit, like a 50% male, 50% female, for example, you recruit a clinical trial. But again, if once it is confirmed, accepted, well, the amount is 50% female, like say 10%, like we can pull people from equal ESI intervals so that some of those females, maybe because of sex disconcord, maybe they are more prone to having more side effects or dropping from the clinical trials that we have no way of knowing if we don't look at this continuous sex representation.
Thank you. Dr. Ma had a question.
Thank you, Brittany. Yes, awesome. Just want to say it's a very interesting topic, and I'm interested in the part that you mentioned. The index is very highly correlated with the hormone levels, especially as the aging dynamic change across age. And I was wondering whether you think it would be a good idea, or if we have the data to using hormone level and age as the outcome predictor to train a model, so that when we predict it, we don't really need the model. Is that equally relevant and a related concept to your binary outcomes?
So yeah, we requested, we thankfully have the data now, the hormone levels, so we can check the correlation. But there is also this previous literature showing that the sex detection model from ESI already shows correlation. But I'm not 100% sure if we can replace, for example, like a hormone levels with like a ESI or estimate one from each other. I would just, at least like to use it more as a confirmatory, because it is kind of like our study stems from sex being very complex. Hormones is just being one piece of the equation. So it's good that it has correlation with the sex hormones, but most likely there are much more things, other things at the metabolic level that we never quantify in our clinical practice, or at least in epidemiological studies, that ESI may be accounting for as well.
Any questions from the audience here?
Yeah, I have two questions. Just about your methodology. The study you did with all-cause mortality, you showed that the ESI discordance just increases with age.
Right.
So all-cause mortality would increase with age. So did you compensate for age in those analyses of
Actually,
all-cause mortality?
the next step we are doing now, we don't have it, but for all these 4 outcomes I presented, we are now having a more unified approach. We are doing 1 year heart failure, 1 year all-cause mortality, 1 year ESRD, using exact same variables, but adjusting other variables, age, sex, or This is the next step we are doing to see how it looks when we adjust it for other variables. We have not done it yet, but this is the next thing. Actually, actively, we have been. Probably in a couple of days that will be ready. We'll be happy to share it.
Okay, good. I'll look forward to that because it will be sad if it just disappears once you control for age, but
right.
That's a risk.
But even if it disappears, again, we never implied causality after this point. What I think it is somehow picking up some other changes. Like we already showed that by age it is ESI is changing.
And maybe it's a better predictor than age anyway. Right. So, and then my second question has to do with the outcomes, like the things that you are predicting by EKG. Are they, if you're doing, if you have a deep learning model using an EKG to predict an outcome, in some ways, isn't that already taking into account ESI? A deep learning model may have built ESI into its own. Conclusions, right?
Yes and no. Like for example, heart failure risk prediction model. In traditional, sex is used always in almost every single heart failure risk prediction models. And now we built the ECG version. We are only looking at ECG. It works as good as using all of the risk factors, where sex is one of them. Somehow sex is inherently embedded in the ECG, but our model's picking up. But there is one thing it can never extract entire information about sex. The reason is that your model, let's say you want to predict heart failure, and you know that for males and females ECG is different. It is somehow picking up. Unless you build a supervised learning model that you are forcing all your model parameters to extract every single information possible from ECG that is associated to sex, it means that you are not using the full potential of it. To a level, yes, somehow sex differences are inherently embedded in the ECG while we are trying to predict one of those outcomes, let's say heart failure. Somehow some of those sex-specific features may be coming into play. But only goal of this supervised learning model is extract all the information related to the heart failure. Maybe occasionally some of the sex-specific information is coming to, but still not the entire, everything we can extract about sex from ECG.
Any other questions? The Mayo was trying to predict both age and sex.
Right.
So have you tried looking at predicting both of them at the same time?
Yeah.
And then maybe just, because I was thinking the same question that Steve was thinking about, just because your ESI may be some kind of encoding both the age and sex in a single parameter. But if you predict both of them and then just kind of adjust those, it may be interesting. And then the other thing is that, the age, predicted age and the biological age may be quite different, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's true. And I know Ibrahim is smiling. We did the age model as well. We have the age prediction model. Can you remind us what was the accuracy point? Plus minus 9?
Mean absolute error of 9.8 or so.
9.8. So it is pretty accurate with the literature, concordant with what is in the literature, maybe a little better than what our other colleagues have done.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so Reza Mirjali, Meza, are you still here? Or Reza, I'm sorry, Reza. Would you like to ask your question? I can read it out. They asked, was the difference in AUC between models using ESI and sex statistically significant? For example, one of the outcomes was 93, whereas the other was 94.
That in the kidney failure, it was not statistically significant. In the heart failure, it was. In the kidney failure, our sample size came down to really, really small, like 400, because we had to find the creatinine, and that where the ECG was recorded at the same date. It significantly reduced the sample size. So that 0.1 difference didn't show up as significant, but in the heart failure it was.
And then it was like Dr. Durrad and Collins, they were talking back and forth. Did you guys have questions you wanted to ask as follow-ups?
Ajay?
Dr. Durrad?
Can you hear us, Ajay, or are you in a place where you can talk?
There he is.
Oh,
Can
sorry.
you hear me?
If you were talking about AJ and JB, no, we were conversing about similar topics, so it's not for the whole group. Thank
Okay,
you.
I wasn't sure if y'all had questions or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Oz, obviously, I believe in predictive models. I've been following your body of work. As you know, I'm very supportive of this type of work. What I want to ask you is a pretty directed question. Which of all of these do you believe is actually ready for a small scale pilot feasibility implementation into clinical workflows? Like amongst the milieu of stuff, you could take ESI and partition it into its constituent components. You could also start componentizing, 50 other variables into the ESI, right, over time. If you were to start thinking about what are areas that are the most ripe for implementation, what would you imagine those being within the body of work that you have?
Thank you, AJ. You mean like overall ECGI projects or specific ESI?
Overall EKG AI projects.
ECGI.
There's a lot of interest in taking some of these, right? And then just systematically implementing it and then evaluating, both intended consequences as well as unintended consequences. And so I'm just kind of curious, within the body of work, what do you imagine being the most ripe for that?
I think for ECGI, we have a lot of mature projects, but I think that two projects that I think are ready for prime for testing. One of them is taking the ECG as an input and telling whether this person has low ejection fraction, medium range ejection fraction, or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or control. Basically, heart failure and EF classification. I think that model we have is pretty mature, validated, it is working well. The other one is the maternal health. I think we have like two very strong models that can detect risk for peripartum cardiomyopathy and preeclampsia with very high accuracy. And I think that one also can be like quite useful actually, considering almost like I don't know if it is the right term, but the embarrassingly high maternal mortality and morbidity in the United States compared to any other developed countries in the world. I think this is one area that we can actually do something.
Well, you should never be embarrassed. So this is all great work. Let's thank our speaker one more time.
Thank you so much.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. And please don't forget to evaluate this seminar when Brittany sends the questionnaire. Thank you very much.
Thank you.